a little hope and cover some missing persons cases that have been solved in recent years. I'm pretty excited to cover these cases. I think we can learn from how these cases are resolved and how we can look at new unsolved cases coming in. And let's face it, it's also refreshing and heartwarming to know that some cases do have happy endings and some cases can be solved. So, as we wrap up 2020 and as we air our last episode of this year, let's talk about 3 cases that started out as mysterious, unsolved missing persons cases, but were eventually solved. First up is the case of Barbara and LaMyra Briley. I actually hesitated on covering this one because they were technically only missing for 4 days, but the story is such a Christmas miracle type of story, I couldn't resist. On December 24th, 2016, Christmas Eve, 71-year-old Barbara Briley and her 5-year-old great-granddaughter, LaMyra, left their New Jersey home to head toward Morven, North Carolina for the holidays. Barbara had made the 500-mile trip many, many times over the last 30 years and knew the trip well. On the way down, however, she apparently ran into some bad weather and then a road detour. Barbara was having a hard time understanding her GPS on her phone, and she ended up stopping at an Exxon gas station in Ruther Glen, Virginia, around 5:30 p.m. She went inside the store and asked the clerk for help reading the directions on her phone. Her family then spoke to her around 8 p.m., and Barbara was expected to arrive at her family's house around 11 p.m. that night. The family was excited. It was Christmas time. They were all going to be together. This was a typical family get-together for the holidays, and the family was waiting anxiously for Barbara and LaMyra to arrive. So around 10 p.m., the family started to call to check in on Barbara and her whereabouts, but her phone was going straight to voicemail. They continued to keep calling her to check in, and 11 o'clock came and went, and still nobody could reach Barbara. Family started to panic now, as this was very out of character for Barbara, especially with them not being able to reach her. So soon after 11 p.m., they reported Barbara and LaMyra missing. They were worried there had been a car accident or something had happened along the way, and they called the local police to let them know. And the police began investigating and searching actually right away. They used cell phone pings to try to determine her last location. They even tracked down the surveillance footage from that Exxon gas station. And they knew from speaking to the cashier there that Barbara had been in there asking for directions. Nothing from her visit to the gas station seemed out of the ordinary, and police had no reason at this time to suspect foul play. They conducted searches wondering if Barbara had gotten lost. She had no known medical conditions, and she had done this drive so many times. Family was confused as to how that could have even happened if that was the case. This made them also worry that something bad must have happened. Barbara was also a retired driver for the New Jersey transit system, so she was a very experienced driver. The family immediately joined in on the search as well and went down to that Exxon gas station. They began passing out missing flyers to everyone they saw there. New Jersey State Police, Virginia State Police, and Morven, North Carolina local police were all actively involved in looking for Barbara and little LaMyra. Because of the surveillance footage they had with the timestamp and what they were able to see from recent pings on Barbara's cell phone, they focused heavily on the area between Richmond, Virginia, and the North Carolina state line. Helicopters were even brought in, and police checked every guardrail for signs that a car may have veered off the road or perhaps there had been an accident somewhere. Christmas came and went, and LaMyra and Barbara's presence remained untouched under the tree. Search efforts continued on for 4 more days with no signs of Barbara or LaMyra. Everyone was beginning to fear the worst. This just was so out of character for Barbara. They couldn't find any trace of a car accident. The helicopter searches had seen nothing from the air in the area that she was believed to have last been in. And even though police weren't suspecting foul play, some people worried that she maybe met someone along the road that could have harmed her or LaMyra and taken them out of the area. On December 28th, a landowner was out walking his dog. He spotted what looked like a vehicle off in the distance on his property, and he went to check it out. He had heard of the missing grandmother and great-granddaughter, as the case had been all over local media, and he immediately thought the Toyota RAV4 he discovered might be theirs. He looked around the area in the immediate vicinity of the vehicle, and he found Barbara. She was unresponsive, laying on the ground about 50 yards away from the vehicle. LaMyra was sitting up next to her, and they both were wrapped in a blanket. 911 was called right away, and Barbara was rushed to the hospital in serious condition. LaMyra, miraculously, was fine and released to relatives after a quick checkup. Barbara soon regained consciousness and ended up making a full recovery. So it appeared that she had made a wrong turn down a dirt road and in the dark went off the road, running over brush and a small tree, and became stuck. Barbara then fell ill and she tried to go for help but ended up collapsing right where they had found her. She said they had survived because LaMyra took care of her, making sure she was eating and drinking. Luckily, since they were on a road trip, they had snacks and drinks in the car along with the blankets, and LaMyra was a smart 5-year-old. They determined that she was so far off the beaten path, that's why they hadn't discovered her. She was also hidden under some brush and trees, as was the car, which is why the helicopters didn't see the vehicle from the air. So after 4 long days of fearing the worst, Barbara and LaMyra were found safe. Everyone attributes their survival to little LaMyra, who took care of her great-grandmother, sharing snacks and making sure she was eating and drinking something throughout the day, each day that they were out there. So how miraculous is this story? LaMyra, just 5 years old, stayed by her great-grandmother's side for 4 days in a remote area with no signs of anyone that entire time. So many things could have gone wrong. They could have been injured. LaMyra could have wandered off and got lost, especially after so many days. Thinking of a 5-year-old staying put for that long is pretty incredible that she didn't wander off and get lost. Officials have credited LaMyra, as have the doctors, and said that it is because of her that Barbara survived. And this case is a perfect example of why we search and why we don't give up and why we put forth all the efforts we can to find people. Even though this was just 4 days, there was an aggressive search. The media was out there alerting everyone of this story. The landowner was alert because he had heard the story. And the 2 were found. So even though this family had to endure quite a traumatic Christmas, it's such a wonderful and happy ending for this family and something they will never forget, especially little LaMyra. Let's talk about our second solved missing person story. Next up is the bit more dramatic case of Kamiya Mobley. Kamiyah disappeared as an infant, only 8 hours old, from a hospital in Jacksonville, Florida, on July 10, 1998. Shanara Mobley was a troubled child and then a troubled teen. She was abused and molested as a child, and in turn she became a rebellious kid and teenager herself. She often skipped school, she ran the streets, she ran away from home many times, and she would even take live-in babysitting jobs where she would lie about her age just so she knew that she would have food and shelter. At 14, she became pregnant and miscarried. At 15, she became pregnant again and vowed to take good care of herself this time and turn her life around for the baby. And she tried hard. She ate well, she began exercising, she moved in with an uncle, started going to church, and with donations from her church family, she was able to provide everything she needed for the baby, including a crib, a car seat, clothing. She seemed to be all set, and living with her uncle, had her own little space, and was looking forward to being a mother and getting her life together and taking care of her baby. Shannara's uncle took her to the hospital the night her water broke, but he didn't stay. He dropped her off and left. The baby's father, Craig Aiken, was actually in jail at the time on drug charges. So Shannara, at 15 years old, was left alone in the hospital to deliver a baby, essentially a child having a child. But a beautiful and healthy Kamiyah was born the next morning on July 10th. Shannara was immediately in love with her daughter. She felt good. She was anxious to get home to her uncle's house and start taking care of her baby girl. So a woman in scrubs came in around 3 p.m. and told Shannara she was her nurse for the next shift. She stayed with Shannara, checking in on her in and out of her hospital room for the next 5 hours. In fact, they even had a few lengthy conversations about motherhood and taking care of a baby, and this nurse seemed really supportive of Shannara and really was lending her an ear to talk to. Around 8 p.m., the nurse came in for Kamiyah and said she needed some tests done. Shannara didn't think twice about it, and that was actually the last time she would see Kamiyah. The Jacksonville police would investigate over 2,000 leads over the next 3 years. It seemed as if the baby just up and vanished from the hospital, and the hospital had no explanation. They did determine that the woman that Shannara had been speaking to was actually not a nurse at the hospital, and they were unable to identify who she was. So unfortunately, Mobley herself was often a prime suspect in the years that would follow. Many thought she sold her baby or gave the baby away. With her troubled past and her young age, the police and the public continued to look at her as a person of interest. 5 years later, Shannara would go on to have another child. 3 more children followed, and she has become a loving and doting mother to her children, but she still mourned the loss of Kamiyah. Every year on July 10th, Shannara would have a birthday cake for her missing daughter. Shannara also sued the hospital and won a settlement of $1.2 million as the hospital was found negligent in the disappearance of Kamiyah. Through the years, Shannara never lost hope that she'd see her daughter again. In August of 2016, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children received 2 anonymous tips claiming that a child in Walterboro, South Carolina, was an abducted child living under the name Alexis Manigault. Police in Jacksonville opened up an investigation of their own and discovered that this child was indeed using the Social Security number of a deceased man. The police also learned that Alexis had found out she was abducted prior when she tried to get a job at age 16 and discovered her birth certificate was fake. The woman she believed to be her mother, Gloria Williams, sat her down and told her the truth about the abduction when Kamiyah asked. Kamiyah had confided to friends that she was an abducted child, but since she had a good relationship with Gloria and loved her as her own mother, she didn't want to turn her in. It is believed that one of the people Kamiyah confided to was actually one that called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. So police arrive in Walterboro to confirm their suspicions. They arrested Gloria Williams, and they identified the true identity of Alexis Manigault as being Kamiya Mobley. So this poor teenager was taken away from everything she knew, and Gloria was sentenced to 18 years in prison. Even though this case is a tragedy and holds heartache for so many people, especially Kamiyah/Alexis, there are others who have rejoiced in finally having answers and knowing that Kamiyah was safe and had a good life. Alexis now answers to both names, Alexis or Kamiyah. She continues to stand by Gloria, which has caused a rift between her biological mom and her. Her biological mom, Shanara, allegedly was so hurt that Kamiyah chose to stand by Gloria during her trial that she told her she had to choose between Gloria or herself. When Kamiyah chose Gloria, Shanara and Kamiyah cut ties. Kamiyah was, however, able to form a bond with her biological dad and recently moved back to Jacksonville to live with him and his wife. This is probably the best piece of news out of this story. They have developed a good relationship. There are happy pictures of them in and throughout social media, and they seem to be doing really well. Kamiyah still talks to Gloria, writing her letters and visiting her in prison whenever she can. And it's easy to kind of understand why, at least for me. This is a woman who raised her for many, many years and did a good job raising her. It was definitely a crime, and what she did was wrong, of course, in abducting her. But I can definitely see why Alexis Kamiyah has chosen to stand by her. So why did Gloria kidnap Kamiyah to begin with, and how come nobody had ever questioned it? And how come nobody had ever questioned who Kamiyah was when Gloria brought her home? Gloria had said that she had a miscarriage and had become very depressed. She worked in a nursing home, and she left her job one day and was just driving around. She found herself in Jacksonville, Florida, visiting the maternity ward of a hospital. Gloria was still wearing her scrubs from her nursing home job, and she heard herself telling Shanara that she was a nurse after she had walked in Shanara's room. But she said it felt like she was having an out-of-body experience. She heard her voice saying the words, and she just couldn't stop it. After several conversations with her and listening to Shanara open up about being afraid to be a mom, Gloria took the baby and walked out of the hospital. Since she had been pregnant, no one questioned where the baby came from when she got home. She was no longer with the baby's father, and she just brought this baby home as if she was hers. There was a TV movie made based on this story, so it may seem a little familiar to you, but everyone says the movie is a work of fiction and actually has very little to do with the way the events really played out. There were no royalties paid to anyone for the movie, so they didn't have any say in the storyline. Kamiyah's dad said most of the storyline is falsely portrayed. So this case is a little bittersweet, but pretty amazing that 18 years after an infant goes missing, they are found alive and well. And I know this isn't the only instance where this has happened. And you can't help but feel sad for everyone involved in this case. Yet, there is some hope in knowing that a case 18 years old can be solved. And we hope that Kamiyah and her dad can continue to form and bond and have a relationship in the future. Whatever is to happen between Shanara and Kamiyah is really yet to be determined. They're both definitely in a difficult place. That's easy to see and even to understand. So hopefully down the road they'll be able to work things out and have a relationship of some sort. So that is the story of Kamiya Mobley. There's a ton of information available on her case, and if you're interested in checking out the TV movie, it is called Stolen by My Mother. But disclaimer and reminder that the movie is in no way, shape, or form fully based on actual events. We are going to hop on over to the country of Singapore for this next solved case. It's really too good to not include this one. The circumstances around what happened in this case are so coincidental and extraordinary, I have to talk about it. Mary Seau, a 55-year-old widow from Singapore, had met some nice people at church in 2010. They had several discussions. They became friendly. They were hanging out often. So when they told her about their transport business that they had in China and how Mary could sell her home in Singapore and invest that money in their company, making her very wealthy, Mary trusted them. So Mary did in fact sell her home and move to mainland China with the proceeds to invest. She was excited about this new venture in life, and she was happy with her new friends and excited for what the future could hold. Mary's family in Singapore knew she had sold her home and was moving to China. When they couldn't reach her after some time, however, they ended up reporting her missing to the Singapore officials. All that they had known was that Mary was going to China. They didn't know her whereabouts or where she planned on staying, and really had no information to even give authorities to start with. However, they were very concerned when they couldn't reach her and didn't hear anything from her. There were very little clues as to Mary's whereabouts over the years. Her only son, Edward, always held out hope that he would find her one day, but the trail to finding her was cold and led absolutely nowhere. In 2015, 5 years after Mary disappeared, a BBC reporter, Juliana Liu, was horrified to learn the story of a woman who died in a crowded Hong Kong McDonald's. This was a 24-hour restaurant, and no one noticed this woman for several hours. This caused Juliana to dive in and investigate, doing a report on the people known as McRefugees. A McRefugee is a homeless person who sleeps overnight in a 24-hour McDonald's restaurant. This term has become very common in Hong Kong, as this is a very prevalent problem or issue that they are facing. It is seen at all 24-hour McDonald's throughout Hong Kong and is actually very well received as being part of normal society. So Juliana herself spent the night with these McRefugees, talking to them and learning their story and getting to know them. She learned that many of them had fallen on misfortune, and the housing prices of Hong Kong were so extreme that there was nothing that they could afford. Many of these people were in fact elderly, and they would seek shelter at these McDonald's restaurants after night falls. In Juliana's report, we also learn that 1 in 5 people in Hong Kong live in poverty. And with a population of 7 million, that's a lot of people. The number is even worse when it comes to the elderly. There was an estimated 1 in 3 living in poverty in Hong Kong. Now, McDonald's in Hong Kong has been receptive to these people staying overnight in their restaurant. They have come out and said they know that these people have nowhere else to go and they're not going to kick them out. They have said they work hard to kind of toe the line and provide safety for everybody and a comfortable place for all. So they keep an eye on this situation, but in general, they will not ask these people to leave. They are welcome, and hence the term McRefugees became a very commonplace term in Hong Kong. As coverage of these McRefugees increased, largely due to Juliana's reporting. It hit mainstream media, it hit a lot of the Associated Press, it was picked up actually all around the world. And while that is going on, Edward received a phone call from a relative. Sure enough, Mary Seau was featured on one of these stories, and word made it back to Singapore to her relatives. Edward had found his mother. Mary was alive and doing okay and living as a McRefugee in Hong Kong. She told her story to the reporter, and as word made it back to Edward, he learned about what Mary had been going through over the last 5 years. They were quickly reunited, even though Mary was very nervous to reunite with family. Edward learned that she had fallen victim to a scam and Mary had lost everything. She was embarrassed and ashamed of losing her money, so she decided to stay in China and work to earn her money back before returning to Singapore. She did odd jobs, and she eventually became what's known as a parallel trader on the streets. Parallel trading in Hong Kong is the phenomenon of China traders taking advantage of importing goods from Hong Kong to mainland China. So I'm not really 100% sure how that works, but somehow Mary was able to support herself doing that, even if just barely. So Mary still felt embarrassed and ashamed, but Edward promised that there would be no talk of it. He just wanted his mother home. So after 5 years of being a missing person, Mary has returned to Singapore to be with her son and her family. She has been doing well and readjusting slowly. She told a local reporter that she doesn't spend any money and she doesn't like to leave her house because she might spend money if she does. Her son, Edward, is just grateful to have her back. He said it will take time for her to readjust and get settled back in the community, but he is hopeful that his mother will reacclimate soon, get back to church, and get back with friends and family that she had left behind 5 years ago. During those 5 years, there were times when Edward feared the worst, that something bad had happened to her, that someone had done something to her, that she may not even be alive, and he was beginning to think he would never see her again. This story brings hope to all the unsolved cases out there. This is an example of why we must never give up the search for answers. The answers are out there. Sometimes it just takes a while to find them. So that's it for this episode of Where Are They? I hope that in 2021 we will be able to update cases that we have already covered with some answers. Make sure you're following the Where Are They podcast on Instagram or find our Facebook page, as we'll post regular updates as we get them.